Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Beyond the Cage podcast presented by Fight Chicks. On this week's live show, Dave and I will go over the major headlines in the world of mixed martial arts. We will also break down UFC Fight Night 47 from this past Saturday in Maine, and we will also pick the main card fights for UFC Fight Night 48 and 49 on this week's show. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is my co-host, The Juice, Dave Sadler. And how's it going, Dave?
Jim, I don't know if you noticed this. Did you see this thing I got going on?
Yeah.
Pretty nice, right?
It's not bad.
I mean, you haven't mentioned it. It's been growing for like a month.
Is that your Chuck Liddell goatee you're trying to get going?
Yeah, I'm getting ready for UFC 178 because I'm going to, do the haro again in my hair, and then people will actually think I'm Chuck Liddell.
That'd be nice.
Wasn't that awesome? I went a good, 45 seconds without even mentioning MMA. That's pretty good.
Well,
I'm ready. I'm ready to go, Jim. I took a shower. I brushed my teeth. I don't want to offend anybody, so hey, let's get into it. I had a pretty good couple days. You guys, everybody, I'm sure saw our cold water challenges. Well, I challenged my friend Eddie Wineland, and he accepted, and he even offered me the opportunity to pour the water on him. So I got to go up to his gym where he does his strength and conditioning, and was able to pour the water on him. So that was a pretty good start to my Saturday. So, yeah, pretty cool.
Well, let's start first here in, I guess, the rounds are a little different here on the live show, but we're going to start with headlines, and we'll give a shout out to our friends at VigilanteMMA.com. You can follow them at VigilanteMMA on Twitter. We may actually be joined by Steve Sadler from Vigilante MMA in progress, but we shall see. He's a busy guy over there at the Vigilante MMA Tower, so we'll see if he'll be able to stop in and chat with us for a little bit.
You see this banner?
Yeah.
High tech.
Well, let's start first, Dave, I guess, with what would be the big headline of the week, and I guess it's kind of a two-part headline. And first off, Eddie Alvarez, after the battling he's had to go back and forth with Bellator, he has finally been released from his Bellator contract, and it looks as though he is signed with the UFC, and he already has an opponent. He will be taking on the Cowboy Donald Cerrone at UFC 178. So, Two big things right there, Dave. Alvarez goes to the UFC, leaves Bellator, and fights Donald Cerrone for his first fight. So let's get your thoughts first on those two big developments in the life of Eddie Alvarez.
That's great. It's great on a couple different points, Jim. Finally, Bellator did what was right, and they allowed him to get out of his contract, which they weren't going to be able to fulfill. That is an important. That's an important step for Bellator. I think it makes Bellator come across as kind of the good guys now. It's obviously good for Eddie Alvarez because he's going to make more money. He is given a co-main event slot on a pay-per-view, on a big pay-per-view, and he's given. If he can come in and beat Donald Cerrone right off the bat, you got to put him top 5 in the division immediately, I think. It's a chance of a lifetime for Eddie Alvarez, and like I said, I think Bellator comes out looking great after this. The new Bellator, Scott Coker's regime, because they've been working on this for how long to get Eddie, for lack of a better term, taken care of, and now he's taken care of. And a side note, adding Alvarez Cerrone to UFC 178 makes me happy. So,
well, just starting first with the Alvarez thing, I think this issue, if you want to call it that, became less of a problem when Bjorn Rebney left. And that's because Bjorn Rebney kind of, more or less, you could say, built the company based on Andy Alvarez. That was the first real big fighter that he was able to bring into Bellator. And he became their first ever lightweight champion. He was the star of most of all their early time shows that they had. So Bjorn Rebney kind of made it personal because he really did not want to lose Eddie Alvarez because he thought he did so much with Eddie Alvarez, had become friends, and I think because of that, he wanted to do anything he could to keep Eddie Alvarez under his company's banner. And I think because of that relationship they had, I think he kind of burnt some bridges with Eddie, and I think that ended up hurting their relationship, and that's what made Eddie not want to stay there, not just from wanting to test the waters in another organization standpoint, but from I can't be around Bjorn anymore. And I think that could have been one of the reasons why Bellator let him go. I don't know. I'm sure there was more than one situation that led to his getting released by Viacom, but I think that whole situation and how everything went down with the contract and all the matching, that was a lot of things that I don't think either party really wanted to go through. And when Scott Coker came in, I think he kind of realized that, and since Eddie, I don't think, wants to be here anymore, even with Bjorn gone. And we only have him for one fight more, regardless of what happens. So what's the point of having him fighting that last fight if he's just going to leave anyway? Let him out now. You move on with Will Brooks as your champion, and you can move on from that and let Eddie Alvarez go to the UFC and see what he can do there.
Yeah, it's it's almost like, am I off base, Jim, if I say that Eddie Alvarez was probably the guy in Bellator that can make an immediate impact in the UFC?
I think, yeah, once Hector Lombard left, I would say that's probably the best assessment of some of the talent over there.
I mean, not that the guys in Bellator, I mean, we have friends in Bellator, not that they're not the best, that they're top-level talent, but I think Eddie is the guy that can make the most impact in the UFC in a month. And I think that Scott Coker is good at being number two. Strikeforce was a big deal. He knew that it was never going to surpass the UFC, but I don't recall when Scott Coker ran Strikeforce, did they ever have real big issues with people going to the UFC and did they ever have big contract disputes and stuff like that, or no?
There weren't too many contract disputes. I mean, they were able to, I think for most of the guys, you can maybe even say they overpaid for some of the top talent to try to get them from the UFC, and that led to not as deep of a roster. And I think that's something that, he's going to maybe change a little bit here at Bellator. Now, I think the company that was backing Strikeforce and the company backing Bellator Viacom are two different things. I don't think the company, I think it was a San Jose-based company, I don't think it was ever really fully invested in making Strikeforce completely viable. So I think that did handcuff Scott Coker a little bit, whereas I think Viacom is truly interested in making Bellator a big deal. And I think that will really help Scott Coker and Bellator out. Now, we're going to mention an article. I believe he did interviews with several websites, but I first found the interview on SheerDog.com, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But that's something that in this interview on SheerDog that he mentions is, he has a lot of financial freedom, but again, within reason. I mean, there's no sense to overpay for somebody if you don't have to, and I think that's kind of what he was saying, that Viacom's going to give him the freedoms to go out and try to get people within reason, which I think is every organization's goal.
Right.
I was going to get back to Eddie Alvarez on my thoughts. Now, for the UFC, first of all, this is great. You were able to get him, after all that trouble and stuff of matching it, after you looked like you had him and then you didn't. You get Eddie Alvarez. He comes in, I think, in this situation a little better because he he's more in shape. He had that one fight with Chandler. He hasn't been sitting as long as he had been, I think, when the previous negotiations going on. You're able to put him in against Donald Cerrone, a top 10 lightweight. And I think with Eddie Alvarez, Dave, all the talk around when they were first signing, how many fights he'd have to get a title shot, he's taking on the Cowboy, who's on a roll right now. I have a feeling, unless the fight's awful, which I don't know how that's possible, but I think the winner gets a title shot. I mean, if Eddie Alvarez wins, I almost think it's a guaranteed. If Cerrone wins, you can maybe him and haw about it, but I think either one wins, it's a title shot. I think just the press of that fight, Eddie Alvarez coming, I find it hard to believe the winner doesn't get a shot at the title afterwards. And so you put Eddie Alvarez in a big-time fight, you test him right away, and I think it's a great situation for both organizations.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought that up with the rankings. Yeah, it's hard to think that with a win, Eddie Alvarez doesn't get a title shot because it's fresh. If Gilbert Melendez beats Anthony Pettis, or whoever wins, Pettis, Alvarez is fresh, Melendez, Alvarez is fresh. If you put Bendo in there against either one of those, that's a rematch. At least it's fresh within the division. Even like you said, even Cerrone is a good shot. I'm surprised that nobody has ranked nobody gave Alvarez a rank in the lightweight division. I guess it's because he hasn't had an actual fight for the UFC yet. But I think definitely with a win, I think Alvarez can get a title shot. But let's not mistake it, Jim. This fight is not a gimme fight for either one of these guys. This is going to be fight of the night, and there's a lot of opportunities for fight of the night on this card.
Now, of course, it was rumored that Cerrone was going to be taking on Alvarez kind of a while ago. Then it looked like that wasn't going to happen as quickly, so the UFC booked Bobby Green against Donald Cerrone. Now, it being official that Alvarez can come over to the UFC, they kind of rebooked Alvarez and Cerrone, and Bobby Green will be moved to another card. And real quickly, Bobby Green coming off the biggest win of his career, beating former Strikeforce champion Josh Thompson, a guy most people had in the top 10. So I would like to think Bobby Green gets another similar caliber opponent. It would have to be somebody on a win because I think Bobby Green's now 4-0 in the UFC. So looking at Bobby Green, who is slowly but surely rising up the UFC lightweight rankings, I think Nurmagomedov is still battling some injury problems. I don't think his turnaround will be as quickly. Who do you think the UFC will tab for Bobby Green here later in the year? Because I think he's a really good talent. He's exciting, and I like to see him fight as many times as possible because he can make some waves in this division.
Bobby Green was scheduled to fight somebody. I love the live show. He was scheduled to fight. I'm trying to find it real quick here. There was somebody that he was scheduled just recently they're outside of the top 10. Let me see here. Yes. Abel Trujillo. He was scheduled. That bout was scheduled. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight. Or I wouldn't mind, I know he's coming off a loss, but Michael Johnson. Those are two fights I wouldn't mind seeing.
I would also maybe throw in an Edson Barboza.
It's a good one, too.
I mean, he's probably like, 13, 14, but I mean, Barboza's a very exciting guy. I mean, and I think the reason it's a viable matchup because Barboza was pretty darn close to being the Cowboy. Let's not forget that before he gets finished. He was right. Seconds away from winning that fight. So, and that's another test for Barboza. Giving him another kind of notable name there. So I think that's a good fight all around. So yeah, if Trujillo, he's been banged up a little bit, right? He was supposed to fight a couple of months ago. So if he can come back strong, that's a good matchup. But so is Barboza. But yeah, like I said, it kind of sucks. A lot of these guys in the top 10 are either booked or kind of coming off of losses, and you like to give Bobby Green someone who's in a similar situation that can kind of skyrocket further up the rankings.
Yeah, Abel Trujillo's 2-0 in his last two fights. Just beat Jamie Varner. So, hey, what do you got? What do you got next scheduled on your little sheet?
Let's move to that Scott Coker interview I kind of referenced already. I told you, kind of mentioned we found it on Sheerdog. Kind of talked about, he talked about the Eddie Alvarez situation and just some of the things he said on here. A lot of people are assuming that the tournament format is going to be dropped completely, and in the interview he says, Yeah, the tournament format, we're not going to. He's basically said we're not going to do as much. He said, if you remember, he ran, I believe, 2 or 3 tournaments over in Strikeforce. So he says he liked tournaments, but they're not going to be like 5 in a 10-week span or something like that. Tournaments are still going to be around, but we're probably maybe only going to see. I personally, I'd like to see like one tournament like in the first part of the year, the first 6 months, and then one in the second part of the year, the next 6 months. And I don't know if that's exactly what they're planning, but I would think it's probably going to be something along those lines more, where there's a little more build-up, there's a little more hype, there's time for these guys to recover, and there's not shows back to back to back. And he addressed that as well. He said, after this season where we're running 10 shows in 10 weeks, he goes, we're not going to do that anymore. He goes, I don't think it's the right way to run, your promotion, because he goes, you don't have enough time to build up these fights. So he said we're going to move probably from about 26 fight cards to a year to about 16 a year. So that means it's about every 3 weeks or so on average. Some might have longer breaks, some might have a little shorter, but I like that span. I think realistically 12 to 16, or even if you went 18 or something, I think that's kind of what is a better model for our organization, because you can build hype around each event. Each event has its own time to go through the media cycle and all that, and also you have time to set up your shows a lot better. And if things get injured because of the quickness of the events, it's easier to replace main events or co-main events when you have more time. And I think that will also allow Bellator to build up more talent, because with running all these weekly fights, that's a lot of moving parts all happening at once, and that's why Bellator has gone with the route of signing local professionals to the undercard. And I think with having less fights, you're going to see. I still think it's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, but I think you're going to see less of that, and you're going to see Bellator start to build a crop, actual roster, a crop of budding young stars, which is something that Scott Coker said that if you want to try to compete with the UFC, you got to try to do it that way. You can't just rely on signing big stars or ex-UFC fighters, kind of like maybe what the World Series of Fighting has kind of been doing.
Yeah, Bellator comes across as big, the number 2 promotion. But if you've ever you've been to an event before, Jim, I don't know if a lot of our listeners have, but when I go to the one in Hammond, Bellator drives around and they don't have semis full of trucks like the UFC does. It's like not a pickup truck, but like one of those big, like a F-350 diesel, whatever they are, and they got a trailer on the back. And I mean, it looks like literally like that's a guy's job, like the cage crew. Like they drive that thing all over the place. And it's just, if you've been to an event, I've been to one at the beginning of the season and towards the end, these guys, like, the PR guys, the assistants that are, getting the media people stuff, they just look burnt out, because they're in Hammond, then they're in Michigan, then they're in Temecula, then they're in Oklahoma, and they're all over the place. And it goes back to like that old saying where if you don't love what you do, then it is work. When you go to the UFC, those people are passionate about what they're doing, and they're running all over the place. And if you go to an event and check the people out who work for Bellator, they just look worn out at these events, because they're, like I said, they're all over, crisscrossing the country. So I think from a production standpoint, announcer, everything will improve by having less and less shows going on. And like you said before, tournaments can work. Scott Coker can make them work, and he's a smart guy, Jim. He's going to do great things for Bellator.
He also talks a little bit about re-adding the women's divisions. It looks as though he wants to have a 145-pound division, and he said one other lower weight class that has not been determined yet. Now, with the UFC adding the 115-pound division, I got to believe it's not going to be that division. So that, by default, and he already said he wasn't going to do 135, so that only leaves 2 options, 125 and 105. Right. So it's going to be one of those 2, so it's a 50-50 chance. In my opinion, I would go with, I think the talent's deeper at 105. And I think that's because so many girls that fight at 125 because of the allure of the UFC are either trying to bulk up to go to 135 or lose the 10 pounds and go to 115. So I think the 125 division in the last couple of years has become kind of weak. And I think for Bellator trying to make a big splash, I think the 105 division would be the way to go, in my opinion. I don't know if that's what they're leaning towards too, but if I was the guy in charge, Dave, that would be my second weight class to add.
Yeah, I'm looking right now on Invicta FC. They currently have 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. They have 14 atom weights.
And that's just on their, that's not on any other organization's roster or whatever. But I just think that the talent I've seen there, I think, is maybe a little better than the flyweight division right now.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Hey, Scott Coker is he's kind of the pioneer, huh, in women's MMA. So whatever division he picks, I'm sure he'll make it work. Especially if he can make a splash at 45. If he can get Carano or any of the other big names that are out there at 45, that will be a big get for them.
Now, is there anything in the article that you saw that kind of caught your eye before we move on, Dave?
No, I like Scott Coker in charge. There weren't very many terrible Strikeforce events. He's got lots of experience, and he's got the connections that he can bring in people. He has a pretty good relationship with Zuffa, so I think that Scott Coker being with Bellator is it's good for business, as they say.
Well, before we end headlines here, I want to talk about one smaller story on MMA Weekly. Dana White just addressed some recent issues about the Octagon canvas, saying they have been in works not just now, but in the last couple of years, and I guess they're pretty close to trying to make the canvas, I guess, more grippy. They said maybe trying to add like a sand-like texture to it so guys don't slip as much. And I think it's more not so much on the blank gray canvas. I mean, if you watch the old UFC fights, it was pretty much just the gray canvas. There really weren't much sponsor logos or any type of lining or anything like that. I think it's more so the logos, because those are like big sticker things. They got to maybe almost change the texture on the logos maybe more than anything else. Because if you look when guys slip, it's usually on the logo. It's not on the gray parts of the mat, or if they didn't clean up the blood very well, maybe they slip on that. But I think that is an issue that they can address, maybe adding some texture to it to help these guys grip. And the second thing he talked about was eye pokes. And Dana White was saying, in the eye pokes, we didn't really have that many eye pokes, when we first started. He goes, in the last couple of years, it seems like we're getting eye pokes all the time. And he said, it's not even, he goes, yeah, the gloves are one thing, but he was more saying, the referee has to do a better job of warning guys and taking away points. He goes, if referees start taking points away left and right, guys are going to stop poking other guys in the eyes. And it's one of those things where you don't really think about it, because most of the time it is accidental. But I guess I'll reference the John Jones Glover Teixeira fight. Him holding his hand out there like that. I mean, you're kind of asking for trouble. And I think if referees do start cracking down more on that, even if it's accidental, guys are going to close their fist. And just a quick point, I've done some limited MMA training in kickboxing, but never once have I gone out there, going like this to Paul. My hands are always closing at the ready. The only time they're open is if I see a guy shooting for a takedown. If I'm in a striking position, my fists are never open. So I don't get how some of these guys have their fist open, because to me that's a pretty basic technique. But anyways, Dave, your thoughts on improving some of the things here in the UFC?
Yeah, the eye poke, I would say reference Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan seems to have a perfect idea with, closing the fingers or with different types of gloves or whatever. I fail to believe that there's not somebody out there that wants to be a part of the mixed martial arts game and make a lot of money that can't manufacture a glove to where you can still grapple and not poke people in the eye. That, I think, is easier to get fixed. The other thing, I'm going to go back a little bit. Remember when I went to Vegas for Brian's fight in November of last year? I told you I went to Zuffa headquarters, and when I looked in to the Zuffa headquarters, they had a FedEx package sitting there, and on the package it said Tough Nations Mat or Finale or something along those lines. Now, the reason I say that is that season had just finished taping, and there's quite a long time between when they say a show is going to air. When they say, like, UFC 178, let's say, they already have those sponsors lined up. It's not like when they get back to Vegas for 178 that they've got a gray canvas and they're like, smack, there's the Budweiser sticker. They've got months upon months for that. And I mean, like, even with these Tough Nations, you go back and you see on the Ultimate Fighter that there's a sponsor on that mat. But if you think about it, you're like, man, they haven't been a sponsor for the UFC for that long. But that happened 6 months ago. So they know that these companies are parts of the sponsorship. I fail to believe that they can't get that logo maybe sewn in to the mat. I don't know. It can't be a sticker. With as much money as some of these guys are making, contracts and all that stuff, sponsorships on the line, you can't have John Jones or, Ronda Rousey, if, she's the new Nike girl or whatever. You can't have her slip and blow out her knee and be gone like as long as Kat Zingano or Dominic Cruz was. You can't afford that simply because that's a sticker. So there has to be a better way. And I mean, like I said, it's not like they're doing it willy-nilly and they're just like slapping a sticker right on the mat. I mean, it needs to get fixed because that could be a very big problem in the future.
Maybe they almost got to go with, again, a mat's pretty big. I don't think that it's not all one piece. I think it's combined. I don't know if that's all one piece, but if somehow they could kind of almost do like a T-shirt, like a screen printed type thing. I don't know if that's what they do already, but as far as I know, like I said, it's some type of like vinyl graphic. I think that is stuck on. I'm almost certain that's what it is. But if they could do some kind of like screen printed T-shirt thing where they're like printed on like part of the mat, so it's almost more like a paint than it is a sticker. Maybe less slipping would happen on the logo, and then maybe adding, again, I don't know how they make the canvas, if it's just a canvas they get from some company, but if they could add some kind of, like they said sand-like, but I'm sure there's some type of thing they could make it maybe like rubber kind of, almost, what they use for the field turf, Dave, like how it has that rubber that shoots up when you see the guys play football or baseball. Maybe they can add something to that, to like however they put the sealant on top, and that would make it a little grippier for the guys. I don't know. This is just me spitballing. I have no idea about mat technology and what works and what doesn't. But you would think it'd be something, again, like you said with the gloves, somebody's working on or something. And at least for the mat thing, guys have been slipping for a while. And he said he's been working on this for years, and that almost to me is almost more of an issue than the gloves, because like you said, if referees start taking points away, guys will learn. Regardless of the glove technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, somebody out there will make something. Hey, I got a couple texts from people. I want to throw some stuff at you.
All right, let's shoot here.
All right. Did you watch SummerSlam this weekend?
No, not at all.
Okay. The reason that they asked, Jones was there. Lesnar defeated John Cena in a pretty dominant fashion. Based on old storylines, they kind of had to have Lesnar win. But Jones was there, and then he took a picture. They said 2 of the baddest men on the planet, whatever. The 4 horsewomen were there, which is Ronda and her stablemates, who can't seem to get victories except for her. But Stephanie McMahon did the whole 4 horsewoman sign, like the old 4 horsemen did. And like the internet's completely abuzz that Ronda's going to be a great WWE superstar. What do you think about that?
Well, she probably would get paid more than WWE. I can, I can guarantee that, and it would, she would have less chance to seriously get hurt probably, but I don't know. I mean, it's up to her if she. I think she's still in the prime of her athletic career. I would say maybe a couple more years down the road before she does, something like that maybe. But again, money always changes some people and everything. So who knows if they make the right offer, what she would do. But I think she would be more content on doing just straight up acting more so than doing wrestling. But again, you never know. Maybe some. I hate to say guest starring, but maybe some brief appearances in some events, maybe.
I think she might do like a Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather did that. He did one fight against like the Big Show or something at WrestleMania. It was one of those, Floyd came out and was making it rain all over the place. She may do something crazy like that, like a one-time deal. But no. Hey, are we going to talk about the idiot that is War Machine before we move on?
Yeah, I guess we can mention him briefly. He was caught.
All right.
Finally arrested by. Yeah. So he was finally caught. It was not by Dog the Bounty Hunter, as he wanted it to be. So it was not by him. And I guess they found him in a hotel around California with some sandwiches and some Mountain Dew, I think, or something like that.
Pizza.
Pizza. Yeah, some pizza and Mountain Dew, and brought him in, and
he's gonna have to answer, Jim. That's pretty much all we can say. I mean, hey, maybe you didn't do it, maybe you did. Maybe she's lying, but you're gonna have to answer for what happened. So, I don't think she's lying. Her face and her body don't look like she's lying. So, enjoy prison, Mr. Machine.
Enjoy prison again.
Return trip. Racking up the prison miles.
That's right. All right, well, let's move on to UFC Fight Night 47 from Bangor, Maine, with this past Saturday on Fox Sports 1. 6 fights were shown on the main card, and we're going to break down those fights here. The first fight of the night was in the featherweight division as longtime UFC veteran Thiago Tavares made his featherweight debut against one of the young up-and-coming guys in the division, Robbie Peralta. Now, Dave, I think both you and I weren't underestimating Tavares' grappling skills, but we thought maybe the weight cut, a guy who has some more muscle to his frame, maybe he wouldn't be as ready to go and as well conditioned as we've seen him at 155. But when you put a fight to bed in the first round, you don't really need a lot of conditioning, and he just pretty much went right out there and attacked Peralta from the start with the grappling game, got this fight to the ground, got in several advantageous positions from the mount to the back, and one of the times he finally got the back, it was kind of an awkward position where it looked like Peralta could have just stood up, Dave, and kind of was in between wanting to stand up and kind of on his knees, and in that process, he left his hands unguarded around his neck. Tavares saw the opening, went around, got the choke, and got the tap in the first round at the 4:27 marker. And this was a very impressive performance by Thiago Tavares, and it definitely puts the featherweight division on notice, I think, because this is a guy who has some serious grappling skills, and I think with those can challenge anyone in this division.
Yep, he moves into a very stacked division. He looks really good. Anytime you can finish somebody in the first round is a great thing. If you're the next guy who has to fight Tavares, I think deep waters is a place that you want to at least try to get him, just to kind of see if the weight cut down to 45 affects him. We haven't seen it yet, and that's got to be something that you test. But I think, was it Florian? Florian was on the. Was it Florian today? Yeah, Florian was the announcer. He said, when Tavares was on Peralta's back, he said, how do you want to lose? Do you want to lose by strikes or do you want to get choked out? I mean, you got to make a decision. You can either protect or you can protect your neck and take punches. And it's like, when somebody like Tavares gets in a position like that, the choice has to be made, and Peralta took the choice and gets tapped out. So yeah, that's a pretty impressive victory at 145 pounds, and the rest of the division should be on notice.
And for Peralta, real quickly, now he's not going to be able to develop jiu-jitsu skills as good as Tavares that quickly, but he has to work on his takedown defense, because if he can stop the takedown, being good at jiu-jitsu, doesn't become as apparent, because obviously he was going to have the better stand-up game. So I think for Peralta, he has to work more on that aspect and being ready for guys to come out there and attack him very aggressively with the takedown game. Now, once he gets to the ground, obviously that's going to be a work in progress. That's not something he's going to solve overnight, and most guys are going to be overmatched by Thiago Tavares on the ground. But that's one aspect you got to learn, stop the takedown, and then when you get on the ground, you got to learn, like I said, you're not going to learn great jiu-jitsu techniques, but you got to learn survival tactics to try to get you into the round and at least keep you in a position where your chances of getting submitted are a lot less likely.
True.
The next fight of the evening was in the heavyweight division as Jack May took on Sean Jordan. And early on, Dave, Jack May was doing a great job of using his height and reach to his advantage. He did a great job keeping the much shorter and stockier Jordan at bay. He wasn't able to really come inside either to grapple or land any of those big power shots. May was doing a good job, not just with his punches, but with his kicks. And I thought he did a great job of keeping Sean Jordan at bay. He came very close to finishing Jordan in that round. He kind of rocked him a little bit, and heading into the second round definitely looked like May had the momentum. Jordan was kind of cut up and whatnot, and May, the first part of the round, was continuing more of the same. He was able to keep the distance, land power shots, and then as he was getting him rocked again, he kind of came in too close, and Jordan, kind of on instinct and desperation, just kind of lunged at him and was close enough to finally grab a hold of Jack May, take him down. And for the rest of that second round, he was able to hold him there and land some nasty ground and pound. And then in round number 3, I don't know if it was, conditioning, he was tired, but once again, he got too close. He didn't keep that range. He got too close to Jordan. Jordan took him down, was able to land more ground and pound, and then eventually got May in a position to where all he was doing was covering up, and the referee had to come in and stop this one in the third round at the 2:03 marker. And this was a very nice comeback win for Sean Jordan, a fight where he was definitely in trouble at a lot of points, but I think due to a couple tactical errors by Jack May, Sean Jordan was able to capitalize on those and get the victory.
Yeah, pretty spot on again, Jim. Sean Jordan, every time he gets in the cage, he seems to add a wrinkle, improve. He's still new to the sport. He's been an athlete his whole life, like we said in the breakdown. But I'm looking here on UFC.com. I don't think that puts him in the top 15. No, it doesn't put him in the top 15. But for somebody like a Sean Jordan, do you like a Brendan Schaub matchup?
I do. I do like a Brendan Schaub matchup. I think that'd be a nice fight.
I think, I know Stefan Struve was hurt and then had his issues at 175, but that might even be a good fight for somebody like Sean Jordan. One of those fights that they could put on the prelims, and it's a test for both guys. Sean Jordan is not an easy. He's not an easy heavyweight. He hasn't been the flashiest guy in all of his victories, but he just goes out there and he just wins. And I had this discussion with Doug from Team Genesis. He's your friend too. People like Sean Jordan, people like what was that young man's name that won at the Tough 19 finale? The Black Beast or whatever he called himself.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, his name's escaping me too, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But guys like that are very entertaining to watch. They go out there, they win. When they hit real hard. Let's be honest. Do we think that those guys have a chance to beat Cain Velasquez or Fabricio Verdum?
No, not really.
The heavyweight division it's not a stacked division at all at the UFC level. And I mean, we just had that discussion, and it was just like, think about it. He's absolutely right. The heavyweight division is probably one of the weakest divisions in the UFC.
That it is, and again, it's something we'll say multiple times. It's just a shame that Cormier and Velasquez are training partners, because they would fight each other in any other circumstance, and that is a move that could have, reinvigorated the division, adding kind of a third player, because it's JDS, Velasquez, and everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the
different talk for a different day.
Right. The next fight of the evening was in the welterweight division, as Alan Joboin made his UFC debut against Seth Baczynski, and you and I weren't sure about this fight, and even when we had Brad Walker on from MMA Torch, we were all kind of like, well, who knows what this fight's going to bring. You got a guy in Baczynski who does have some talent, has had some exciting fights, but he's also had some bad fights in the UFC, and Joboin coming in from the RFA organization, he's been exciting, but how's he going to do against, UFC talent, on a main card for the first time? And this was a very exciting fight. Both guys were going back and forth. Both guys had each other in trouble, and it was Joboin, though, that came out on top. He was able to land a nice left hook that kind of started the downfall of Baczynski there. He was able to go in and throw more combinations to the head, and it was able to get a knockout stoppage here in the first round at the 4:23 marker. And like I said, very exciting fight. It was very close. Both guys were hurt, but Joboin was able to find the opening, land the hook, and go in there and get the finish.
Alan Joboin. Yeah, that was about. Hey, that was funny. I hope that comes across on the audio version. Otherwise, you guys missed out. That's about as good a debut as you can have. You're on a main card. Got that bonus. What did he get? He just got the $50,000. I say just, but he got $50,000. He's in the UFC. It's a dream. A dream he's had to be in the UFC, and that's a way to make a statement. The names that he's beat coming in probably weren't the best, but to come in and a name like Seth Baczynski that's been around the division for a long time, he's probably 3 fights away from getting into that top 10, top 15. But it's a pretty solid performance. Helped the UFC out on a week or two notice, and I definitely want to see what this guy can do. I don't even know who to throw him in against, but Joboin was super impressive.
I just want to throw it out there. Thiago Alves was the guy who fought Baczynski before this fight, and I know Thiago Alves was coming off a layoff, but Thiago Alves, known knockout artist, he couldn't finish Seth Baczynski, and Joboin was. So, I know different fights and everything, but that's a big deal. You can go in there, and like I said, Baczynski's a veteran. I don't think he's been finished in the UFC, at least by knockout, maybe once, but he's a pretty solid, guy, and he was able to take him out in his first fight. So, interesting to see who he gets match up with next here in the ever deep welterweight division for the UFC. But let's move on to the next fight of the evening in the middleweight division, as Tim Boesch took on Brad Tavares. In the first round, Dave, Boesch, obviously his game plan was to try to get this fight to the ground, and he was not able to do that. Brad Tavares did a great job of staving off the takedowns. If he did get taken down, he was able to pop right back up. And as I look over the stats here, courtesy of Fight Metric, Boesch was just 1 of 5 on his takedown attempts. Looking at strikes, as noted, Tavares outstruck him in the first round, just looking at strikes here by the round, with a total of 11-4, and was definitely more active. And moving to the second round, it looked like, man, if Boesch can't get this thing to the ground, he's just going to get picked apart. And then in round number 2, I think Boesch maybe got a little angry, a little desperate, and realized, all right, I can't sit back against this guy. I can't be at range. If I can't take him down, I got to do something. So he just kind of started being really aggressive, started kind of blitzing Brad Tavares a little bit. And I'm not sure if Tavares was ready for that. And lo and behold, Tim Boesch was able to land one of those big, powerful right hooks to the jaw of Brad Tavares and was able to land a more series of serious punches to get this thing finished in the second round in front of his crowd there in his home state of Maine at the 3:18 marker. And I think this was a situation where Tavares, we know he can be tactical, we know he can sit back, we know he can counter, but I think sometimes he maybe sits back too much, and I think the pressure Boesch was putting on him got to him. He wasn't expecting it, and he got caught and got finished by a fight and a fighter he could beat. And I think that is something Brad Tavares moving forward he's going to have to address, because once there's a weakness on you, guys start exploiting that. And if your weakness is put a little pressure on them, maybe you can get a knockout. Guys are going to start doing that a lot more. And that is something Brad Tavares has to fix rather quickly.
Yeah, definitely. At 185 pounds, you don't want to give guys too much of the opportunity to, hey, just come at me, and I'll freak out and you'll have an easy knockout. It's not an easy way to make a living. Tim Boesch lived out probably one of the best moments of his career, fighting in front of his home state. Able to get the knockout, able to get performance of the night bonus. Guys always want to fight in front of their hometown. It's always good to be the good guy. But Jim, work with me here. Tim Boesch, should he ride out into the sunset, or do you think he has a lot left? It's not going to get any better than it did last Saturday.
No, and I think that's something he can address, because, yeah, did he beat Brad Tavares on Saturday? Yeah, but like I said, that's a fight Brad Tavares can win and probably should have won. I don't think there's any mistake. He was thoroughly dominating that fight. He had the right strategy. He has a great skill set. He's still very young in the sport, but looking at Tim Boesch, it was part strategy, but I think it was part desperation to rush in there, because there's a very real chance that he gets caught as well with something. I mean, you leave yourself opening, even if a shot's not coming that hard, that's when you get knocked out. And that was a very real possibility, either with punches or kicks of Brad Tavares. So it was a desperation move. It worked out, but I think Boesch, kind of had his run there, and, he wasn't able to get quite over the hump to the title mark. And, yeah, like you said, I'm not sure if there's a better way to go out. I think it means a lot just because it was Maine. It's not like the UFC goes to Maine all the time, or, he was from another state where it comes in all the time. So I think to go out like that, he's already, I believe, 35 years old, 34, 35. I mean, he's not getting any younger, and I think the middleweight division, I think you could maybe argue a couple of years ago was weak. I think is maybe now better than it ever was, especially with some of these Strikeforce guys that have come over. I wouldn't be surprised if he retired. I think that would be a good time. I mean, if he really needs the money, I guess maybe, but if he has another job lined up and a source of income, then I think that's no better way to go out in the sport.
Speaking of going out in this sport, let's move on to the co-main event of the evening.
That is right, as the co-main event was in the lightweight division, as two former Ultimate Fighter participants went up against each other, as Ross Pearson took on Gray Maynard. Now, in the first round, Dave, I probably would have gave it to Gray Maynard. I thought he did a good job mixing in the takedowns with the strikes. He was 2 of 4 on his takedown. Pearson, did pop up, but he landed some ground and pound, and I think because of the threat of the takedown, I think Pearson was maybe a little off kilter, a little bit, and I think his striking, which, again, I think was better, wasn't as apparent in that first frame. And then in the second frame, Pearson was able to stop the takedown and even actually get a takedown of his own, as he was I'm sorry, that was not a takedown. Actually Maynard didn't attempt a takedown. That's what I meant to say. So Maynard went to kind of go more on the hands a little bit there, and that played right into Ross Pearson, who, looking at the total in strikings, Dave, in that second round, Pearson outstruck Maynard 13-1. And landed strikes there. So, as you can see, it did not go Gray Maynard's way. He didn't push the takedown early enough, and left himself opening, and that's what Ross Pearson can do. He's a very technical guy. He was able to go in there, land some straight combinations to Gray Maynard, and get the knockout finish. And again, this was a fight, again, I thought you can kind of almost say like the maybe the Tavares or the Jack May fight. The other two guys were winning early, but then they made mistakes later on in the fight that the other fighters were able to capitalize on. Now, in this instance, this is a second consecutive knockout loss for Gray Maynard, and I believe out of his last 4 fights, the 3rd time he's been finished. And it definitely looks as though this might be the beginning of the end for Gray Maynard. And I believe I saw it was I don't know if it was an article, it might have just been a post simply on Reddit, but when guys get into their 9th year of fighting MMA, it seems as though that may be a sign that they're on the downside of their career. And you can point to several different examples of guys, at the top of the division or a division at one time, and then they kind of hit that 9-year mark and they start to go down and lose a lot more. And Gray Maynard's at that point. I believe he's now been in it for 9 or 10 years. And, that's not to say Ross Pearson isn't talented or couldn't have knocked him out a couple years ago or anything like that. But when things start to becoming a pattern, Dave, and it looks as though it is for Gray Maynard, either a major change has to be done, or it's time to go.
Yeah, I read somewhere that he changed gyms leading up to this fight, and I'm trying to find.
Yeah, it's his 3rd gym change. He originally was with Extreme Couture, then he went to AKA and San Jose, and for this one he went down to Power MMA with CB Dalloway and Ryan Bader. Right.
And I've said it before. I said it last week, leading into the fight. If it's time to go, it's time to go. If you're Gray Maynard, you're 4 fights, 5 solid victories over much younger guys, much bigger guys. There's a whole lot of circumstances. Don't stick around with that false hope that you're going to win the belt, because you had multiple chances and now you're in a pattern. That's 3 in a row. Your fight against Guida, which would have been the 4th one back, it was a boring fight, and then you lost to Frankie. So your last 5 fights haven't been the best, the cream of your crop, I guess. But yeah, it's time for Gray to go. He's a nice guy. It's time to go, Mr. Maynard.
And for Ross Pearson, this is a huge victory for him, because If you look at his last 2 fights, he had that unfortunate no contest against Melvin Gillard, which was looking to be a very good fight. That had to get, basically canceled. That one basically doesn't even count. And then you had his last fight where he got robbed down in Albuquerque there against Diego Sanchez. So he takes on another big name, another big-time opponent in Gray Maynard, and he's able to pass the test and not only just win the fight, but get a knockout. And I think this was just so huge for Ross Pearson, a guy who kind of has been in a little bit of turmoil. A guy who had some success at 155, had some losses, went to 145, went 1-1. He felt kind of too drawn out. He's returned to the 155 division. He's had some good performances since returning, but those last 2 fights I think would wear on anyone's mind, kind of make you question some things a little bit. But to go in there and take out a guy like Gray Maynard, even maybe on the downside of his career, I think is a really big deal for Ross Pearson, and I think a huge confidence booster to him. And I think that can help really project Ross Pearson, because he very easily could be 3-0 in his last fights, but instead he's 1-1 with no contest. So this is a guy who is very exciting. I think fans do like this guy, Dave, and I think fans like to see him. And I hope, we kind of threw out for Bobby Green, Abel Trujillo and maybe Edson Barbosa. Now, he's fought Barbosa before. Maybe in a veteran like a Jamie Varner or a Joe Lazone are some notable names in there. Probably forgetting some people as well, but there are guys Ross Pearson can fight and make exciting fights, and he's not that far out of the top 10, to be quite honest. He's really not that far.
How about Miles Jury?
I like a Miles Jury. I also like maybe like a Tony Ferguson. I also I don't know if he still wants to fight, Dave, but I'd love to see Pearson against Takanori Gomi.
How about this? Miles Jury is coming off he's 14-0 with a 5-fight winning streak with wins over Chris Saunders, Michael Johnson, Ramsey Nijem, Mike Ricci, Diego Sanchez. Currently ranked 9, Ross Pearson moves up to 14 in the division. Book it. Book it, Dano.
It's a good fight.
Oh, except for Jury's expected to face Takanori Gomi in September.
Let's take Jury off that and put in Pearson.
Yeah.
No, that's the only reason I say that is because Miles is not going to stand with Gomi. Right? I mean, it's not going to happen. Whereas Pearson will. I think it'd just be Gomi. Gomi still got some fight left in him. He might not. He's not going to get back to title contention, but he's still got some fight left in him, and he hasn't looked back. His fight against Isaac Valley Flag, I thought was excellent. I think that was his last fight. That was a scrap. You know what I mean? He can still go in there and scrap with anybody.
True.
All right, let's get to the main event. Ryan Bader against Ovince St. Preux, better known as OSP, in the 205-pound division. Early on, Dave, Ryan Bader was definitely having trouble judging the range and speed of Ovince St. Preux in the striking game. He seemed off rhythm. He couldn't really get what Ovince was doing, shooting in with his range and his unorthodox style. And I think really in the first 2 rounds he was definitely catching Ryan Bader off guard, and I think that was also messing with his takedowns, because that same range you use for striking, you got to use to get in for a takedown. I think that was really affecting Bader with the takedown. He wasn't really able to be as effective in those early frames, and I probably had it 1 round apiece heading into that 3rd round, and I think conditioning also learned with Bader, maybe realizing the timing thing, start to lead to Bader almost exclusively going into wrestling mode. And I think for Ovince, had this been a 3-round fight, I think he could have won it. But being a 5-round fight, you definitely had to favor Bader, who you would figure to have more in the tank and be ready to go for a longer fight. And I think those 2 elements really helped Ryan Bader take the next 3 rounds and win this thing 4 rounds to run using his very dominant wrestling. And don't get me wrong, Ovince hung in there. He gave a very game performance, but at times you just saw him kind of rushing in with reckless abandon, Bader kind of just simply moving away. And, you look and go, if he was fighting someone that knows how to counter more effectively, he probably would have been knocked out already. Yeah. Could you imagine him rushing in against like John Jones or Glover Teixeira, or even when he was at 205, Lyoto Machida or Rumble Johnson? He'd be knocked out. You know what I mean? You can't go in there throwing these long punches and coming like this and look, my face is completely open. You know what I mean? He lost to Ryan Bader, but he's got to tighten up the striking thing. It's good to be unorthodox. He kind of knows how to use the range. He is powerful, but if you leave yourself too many openings, there are guys at the top in the division, I even missed out Gustafsson, that will take advantage of you and will knock you out. It's just lucky for him that Bader has the power, but he's still not there, with the countering game. And Ovince just needs to work on some things because he's still young, he's still raw. You talked about Sean Jordan, being new to the sport. Ovince is almost in the same exact thing. He's a football player turned MMA fighter, and around the same age, same number of fights as Sean Jordan. So a guy that definitely has a lot of skills and potential, Dave, but he's still very raw.
Yeah, Ovince St. Preux, like you said, had a game performance against Ryan Bader. That same performance would have been an awful performance against anybody above Ryan Bader. It's like you said, it's one thing to be orthodox, but to be orthodox and for lack of a better term, to be orthodox and dumb and leaving your head wide open is not going to get you very many victories in the top 10 in the UFC's light heavyweight division.
Well, that puts it in the books for UFC Fight Night 47. And now, Dave, we got the 2 events in 2 days. We have UFC Fight Night 48, and we also have UFC Fight Night 49. We're going to pick all the fights for that. It will be 10 fights in total, but we're going to start with the one that will technically come first, and that's UFC Fight Night 48, as it will be in Macau, China, the second attempt for the UFC over in China. This will be exclusively shown on the Fight Pass, and I believe it starts, 9 a.m. Eastern time, Dave, if I'm not mistaken?
No.
No?
It's, I want to say it starts at 4 a.m. Pacific, or 4 a.m. Eastern.
4 a.m. Eastern? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
let you discuss.
Well, regardless of time zone, it's on the Fight Pass there with
Yeah, how about
four
my Fight
fights.
Pass didn't work? I sent an
Yeah,
email, and they're
yeah.
like, your Fight Pass. Like I sent an email, and I got an automated response, and they say, don't respond to this email, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, thinking that there'll be a follow-on email. What do you know? My Fight Pass works like 4 days later. Like,
Yeah,
hello?
I
And
was I wanted to watch some fights there, so I went on your Fight Pass, and all of a sudden it said, if you want to sign up for Fight Pass, here's the link for the free trial. I'm like, what? Dave, one of the cool things you got to do when you were in Vegas, you got to spin like the UFC like prize wheel, and you won a free year subscription to Fight Pass. So I was like, I'm pretty sure he has a subscription. So I immediately texted you of the issue, and you're like, that's weird. And you sent the email, and it got fixed just in time. It would have been a disaster had it not been solved in time.
amen.
So
Jim, I'm looking at these fights. You know that this fight card is, like Dana always says, it's for China. It's not for the U.S. When the only two fights that have odds are the main event and the co-main event.
that sounds about right. And well, the first fight of the evening will be in the featherweight division. As check out these names, Dave. Young Yu Ning will take on Jempeng Yang. And don't worry, I got numbers for these guys. Are you ready? All right, looking at Yang making his UFC debut. He has won 4 of his 6 career fights by submission, and his last fight was all the way in May of 2013, which was a win. But his last fight before that, was in 2010. So he's only fought once in the last 4 years. And looking at his opponent, Gang Yu, very similar, UFC debut, only has 3 wins to his credit, 2 are by knockout. His last win, much like his opponent, was in May of 2013. After that, his last fight was in 2009. So these guys combined have fought twice in the last 5 years. And they're the first fight on a UFC main card, albeit a Fight Pass card, making their UFC debut. So very interesting matchup. I know we give our picks at the end, but I think I might just give my pick right here for this one. I might as well flip a coin. I'm not really sure. I probably would go with Yang just because he has more wins. I mean, the Yang Yu I think is like 3-3 with like a draw. You know what I mean? It's not a very impressive record, really for either guy. But yeah, I'm gonna go on a limb. I guess to Yang. I don't know. It's not like I can find tape on these guys, so that's what I got for these two guys, Dave. I don't know if you have anything different.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Yang as well, just because he has a nickname and it's Tiger. So there you go.
All right, we'll get that pick out of the way, just to get out of the way. But all right, next fight, we actually do know one of the guys in this lightweight fight, as Li Peng Zhang will take on Brendan O'Reilly, and I believe Zhang he won the first ever Tough China, I believe, one of their weight classes. So he's actually 1-0 in the UFC, and he beat Wang Sai again for the UFC contract at UFC Fight Night 37. Of his 7 career victories, 3 are by submission. Looking at O'Reilly, it's his UFC debut, but this guy was on the Tough Nations Australia versus Canada for Team Australia. Of his 5 career victories, 2 are by submissions. He's 5-0 in his career. Now, if I remember, Zhang probably didn't. I think he was the guy that didn't look really good, but somehow got the victory. If I'm not mistaken, going back, I think both you and I thought Wang Sai had won that fight, but Zhang ended up getting the victory in the UFC contract. Now, Sai has a fight on this card, so he ended up still getting picked up by the UFC. But Brendan O'Reilly, he was the guy with that beard, Dave, on Tough Nations, and he always wore that kind of like wicker-style cowboy hat, if you remember from Tough Nations.
Yep.
I think he lost in the first round, if I'm not mistaken, but a guy that can be very aggressive with the strikings, and I think if you're Zhang, you probably want to try to get this thing to the ground. I believe that's how he lost his fight after Tough Nations. So I'm probably going to go with we'll do, because it's the Tough Nations. We'll do the picks like this just to make it easier. I'm probably going to go with O'Reilly. I think he'll be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. I think he's fought better competition. Going through the Tough Nations, I think, was a bigger deal than going through the Tough China. And I think Brendan O'Reilly's probably the favorite. I would go with him.
Yeah, I'm going to go with O'Reilly, too. He lost his fight to Cajun Johnson via submission in the first round. And like you said, we weren't that impressed with his opponent with Li Peng. We weren't that impressed with his victory on the Tough Nations or on the Tough finale. So yeah, I think O'Reilly's the guy that you got to pick in this one.
Now the next fight, Dave, we can actually break down very real. We got some very big names here in the welterweight division as Tyron Woodley takes on Young-Hun Kim. Looking at Woodley, 3-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Rory McDonald at UFC 174. Of his 13 career victories, 5 are by submission. Looking at his opponent, Young-Hun Kim, 9-2 in the UFC with a no contest. Currently riding a 4-fight winning streak. His last fight was a victory over John Hathaway at Fight Night 37. And of his 19 career victories, 10 are by decision. So for this matchup, obviously Kim wants this thing to go longer. He wants this thing to go the 15 minutes. And while Kim can stand, and he's kind of shown some reckless abandon in his last couple fights, Dave, getting a couple knockout finishes over Eric Silva and over John Hathaway, I think if he goes in there with a reckless abandon against Woodley, he's going to get caught and knocked out. Now, the grappling game's tricky because Kim is long and lanky. He's definitely going to be the longer and taller guy. And surprisingly, I would say maybe even a little bit bigger than Woodley, just because Woodley's a little stockier. I mean, Kim's a pretty big welterweight. Doesn't he cut like 30-some-odd pounds to get down there? I mean, he's a really big dude.
He's 6'1".
Yeah, he's 6'1", and I think Woodley's like 5'9".
5'9", yep.
Yeah, so there's definitely a size there, and I think for Kim, he can stand up with Woodley, but he can't go flying in there, I think, like he has his last 2 fights. He has to be a little more calm, a little more reserved. In the clinch game, I think you help out maybe Woodley a little bit, but we saw in his last fight, Woodley didn't really look that good in the clinch against Rory McDonald. So that could be an area with Kim's judo background that he can exploit getting there in the clinch. But you still got to be wary of takedowns because Woodley can take you down. He can land some nasty ground and pound. But for Kim, I would say really it's just try to keep your range if you can. If you get in the clinch, use the judo background. But really just don't go into reckless abandon. And if you're Tyron Woodley, you got to see if you can get inside the pocket. And if Kim is going to go crazy, sit on your shots and wait because an opening will present itself.
Yeah. I like this fight, Jim, a lot. Oh, excuse me. I like it so much I had to yawn. I like this, and I like what's happening in the welterweight division. Tyron Woodley lost in June of this year, and he's already right back in there. If he can beat Kim in this fight, he's right back in the talk to get back up in the, top five type fights. He had a terrible fight against McDonald. Not a terrible fight, not a good fight, but I like what these guys are doing. Yeah, they're losing fights. They're getting right back in there. And I think that's going to go a long way to prove to the UFC that he's ready, for those top-level fights. Kim, one thing I'm anxious to see, usually you would think after a big knockout like he had a Hathaway, you would be more concerned with somebody like Hathaway, like how's he going to respond after that big knockout. I wonder if there's any reverse effects on the guy who delivered the huge spinning back elbow, which was Kim. Thinking, does he have to go out and be spectacular against somebody like Woodley, to improve his stock some more? I don't think that he does. If he does what he does, I think that Kim can be successful. But if he goes out trying to prove a point that he can always be that exciting and, always provide a flashy knockout for the UFC, I think that he'll get into trouble, and he'll get into trouble quickly against Tyron Woodley.
The main event of the evening pits former Ultimate Fighter winner Michael the Count Bisping against Kung Lee. Looking at Mr. Lee, 2-1 in the UFC. He's currently riding a 2-fight winning streak. However, his last fight and win was all the way back at Fuel TV 8 where he defeated Rich Franklin, and that was in November of 2012. And 8 of his 9 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Michael Bisping, 14-6 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Tim Kennedy at the Tough Nations finale, and 14 of his 24 career victories are by knockout. Now, standing up, Kung Lee definitely has the better knockout power of the two. Now, the X factor will be conditioning. As this fight goes longer, it definitely plays in the hands of Michael Bisping, who we know has no problem going 15 or even 25 minutes. He has no problem doing that. He's the more technical guy and a little more straightforward. Now, if Kung Lee can put the pressure on him early, maybe he can get a finish. But I think for Bisping, if he's able to do his usual good footwork and head movement and maybe mix in some wrestling, which is always, I feel like, an underrated part of his game, I think he can very easily go out there and get a victory over Kung Lee. But if he's not able to weather that early storm, Kung Lee can walk away with another knockout victory.
Yeah, this is an interesting fight, Jim. We talked about Gray Maynard and Tim Boach and all those guys if they're on their way out. Bisping just keeps going win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. If he gets beat by Kung Lee, considering the problems that he's had with his eyes or with his eye, he had that detached retina. Was out for what? A full year after the Belcher fight. It's interesting. I mean, does he leave if he can't beat Kung Lee? I know he kind of said it tongue-in-cheek on UFC Tonight. He said, if I lose to him, I don't deserve to fight, blah, blah, blah. But, he's done a good job on the UFC Tonight and all that kind of stuff, so he has other streams of income. But, like I said, it's a very interesting fight. I think in the striking department, Kung Lee's obviously more superior than Michael Bisping. Bisping's has improved, but it's an interesting fight all around because I don't know if either one of these guys, I mean, they want to have title hopes, but I don't think either one of these guys have much for whoever the champion would be.
Well, since we're doing our picks here in a round, we didn't pick the Woodley Kim. I'm going to pick Tyron Woodley. I think that's going to be my pick. I think Kim can win, but I would go Tyron Woodley. And then in this one, I'm going to go with Michael Bisping. I think he will be able to weather the early storm against Kung Lee, so I'll go Woodley and Bisping.
Yeah, those are the same two. I'm going to take Woodley and Bisping as well. I think Kim's got talent, man. I just don't think that I think Woodley, especially coming off a loss, I think Woodley's going to do what he needs to get done, and I think Bisping takes the fight.
All right, well, let's move on to UFC Fight Night 49, which will be airing on Fox Sports 1 later on Saturday, not as early. I think normal, like 10 o'clock start time there for everybody at least on the East Coast, so you'd probably be able to watch this one live for most people. So the first fight of the evening, I believe, will be in the lightweight division. Check that, featherweight division, as Chaz Skelly will take on Tom Ninamaki. Looking at Ninamaki, he is 1-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Nicholas Backstrom at UFC Berlin.
The goalie?
8 of his 21 victories are by submission. No, not the goalie. The other Backstrom from Sweden. I'm sure there's a lot of those there.
Wonder how many times he hears that.
Yeah. Looking at his opponent, Chaz Skelly, 0-1 in the UFC. His UFC debut, he lost to Marad Bektik at UFC on Fox 11, and 6 of his 11 career victories are by submission. Now, I don't remember Skelly's debut fight. I do remember Ninamaki's fight, and I remember him being a pretty good wrestler against Backstrom. He had the top control for majority of that fight before getting caught in a submission and tapping out. So I would say for Ninamaki, that's probably going to be his game plan. I look for him probably to try to go in there and get the takedown against Skelly. I haven't really seen a whole lot on Skelly. Like I said, he had the 6 of 11 career victories by submission. So just looking at the stats, Dave, and what I've seen so far, at least from Ninamaki, I would expect a grappling battle between these two. Maybe that turns out into a stand-up fight. But just looking at the notes I have, that's probably what I would see. Maybe we'll see a submission finish from one of these guys, but I expect this to be a more ground-based fight. And this is a fight where Very interesting fight to kick off the card. Names not too many people have seen or know, and a fight that I'm not sure packs a whole lot of excitement. So this fight's kind of up in the air for me, and I maybe would have tried to put the maybe the Max Holloway fight as the kickoff card, but they chose this one.
Oh, I was looking at the card. I'm like, the Max Holloway. I didn't realize it was up further on the card.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I looking? No, I was thinking the Magny Garcia fight could kick off the card, but what do I know?
Well, that probably should have been on the main card, considering some of these names we're going to go over here. But
anyway, yeah, I think I agree with all your points. It's going to be a grappling-based fight. I think it's going to be not the best fight to kick off the card unless these guys decide not to grapple. And yeah, I definitely probably would have put somebody else in that spot. But if you're Skelly or Ninamaki, this is your chance. You know, you're on cable TV in front of all the world to see, and you know, we'll see what they choose to do with that kind of you know, for lack of a better term, with that responsibility. What are they going to do with it? They're going to stink the joint up. They're going to get the card started the right way. This is a good way to get in the good graces of Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta.
Next fight of the evening is in the lightweight division, as James Vick will take on Volmir Larazzo, or Lazaro, probably. Looking at Lazaro, his UFC debut, he is currently riding an overall 11-fight winning streak. He has not lost since 2010, and of his 12 career victories, 9 are by knockout. Looking at his opponent, James Vick, 1-0 in the UFC. His only UFC win in his debut, he defeated Ramsey Nijem all the way back at UFC Fight Night 26, which was actually in August of last year, so he's been out of action for a whole year. 5-0 in his career, 3 of those victories are by submission. Now, James Vick is a very long and lanky 155-pounder. If you remember, he was on the Tough Live season, and a guy that I think has some really good stand-up, and because of the length, a very hard guy to take down. Now, if you're Lazaro, just looking at the stacks, it looks as though you're a stand-up fighter, and probably that's where you're going to want this fight to play out. So you got to be able to try to get on the inside of James Vick. If you can't get on the inside, Vick is going to pick you apart with his long range, not just with his punches, but with his legs. And for Vick, let's see how he looks after a year layoff. I mean, beating Ramsey Nijem is a pretty big deal. Ramsey Nijem is a really solid competitor, and for that to be your first UFC fight, and not only beat Nijem, but get a finished victory, I think is a big deal. But having a year layoff, does that kind of slow down some of that momentum he had coming off of the Ultimate Fighter? So, you know, these are all questions we'll see answered on Saturday, but I think this will be a fun fight. I mean, you see the knockouts from Lazaro, and we know Vick, even though he has the majority of his wins by submission, you know, he has some knockout power too with those long limbs, and I think this is a pretty exciting fight, Dave.
Yeah, the layoff is what I want to see as well. You know, Vick, like you said, his previous victory over Ramsey is a big deal, but with a year in between, it's kind of like, you know, for lack of a better term, it's kind of like Kat Zingano. She beat Miesha Tate, but how much of that is worn off, you know, with her fans, with the UFC? People forget after a couple of months, you know what I mean? When you go back and think, oh, who did he just beat? So, you know, hopefully we see an improved James Vick because it's been a year, and he makes us forget about the Ramsey fight and does something more spectacular. His opponent, I had no idea about, making his UFC debut, like he said. It says he's got 5 first-round finishes, so that's good. But maybe they should have let off the card with this one. This one seems like it has a better chance of fireworks than the other one.
I think so. I think so, too. And at least you got some – well, again, you got somebody fans may have kind of remembered from the Ultimate Fighter.
Right.
Got something. All right, next fight is actually going to be a catchweight fight. I think it was supposed to be at 145, but Max Holloway will take on Clay Collard. Looking at Collard, it will be his UFC debut. He has won 4 out of his last 5 fights, has not lost in 2 years. Of his 13 career victories, he has 8 knockouts to his credit. He'll be taking on Max Holloway, who's 4-2 so far in the UFC, currently riding a 2-fight winning streak. His last fight, he defeated Andre Fili at UFC 172, and of his 9 career victories, 5 are by decision. Now, for Max Holloway, to be honest, I think this might be kind of a step down. Andre Fili was a really solid competitor. I believe he trains with some of those guys at the Alpha Male, was able to go in there, get a finish on a main card of a pay-per-view. Now you're taking on a UFC newcomer here on this Fight Night card, and I think for Max Holloway, I would have liked to see him take on someone of a more known quantity. Now, that's to say that this Collard isn't any good or anything like that, but I would have liked to seen Holloway take on maybe somebody else. And I think with the catch weight, you got to believe that's on Collard's end, right? I find it hard to believe that Holloway, his 7th fight in the UFC, he has to make a catch weight fight. Yeah, it could be. You know what I mean?
I read it says Ernest Chavez was suspected to face Mirsad Bektik at the event. Chavez was forced out of the bout with an injury and was replaced by Holloway. Then the guy Holloway was supposed to fight pulled out of the bout in the week leading up to the event and was replaced by Clay. So that's clearly why there's a catch weight. You know, the guy's taking the fight on 9 or 10 days notice. So
yeah, well, you know, even on notice, you would have liked to see him take on someone more, but on 9 days notice, that definitely doesn't help taking on Max Holloway. It really doesn't help. And, you know, you can't always pick and choose sometimes, you know, when you get the call from the UFC. And when you do, you almost got to kind of take it. And for Collard, you know, he takes the call. And, you know, we'll see. You know, maybe with that short time for a fight, maybe that, you know, because, again, Max Holloway, again, you're preparing for a fight. So it's not like you're going to be completely out of shape or anything. But you know, when you're looking at specific strategies and trying to get guys timing and look at tape and stuff, it definitely, you don't have as much time to prepare like that if you're Max Holloway, whereas your Collard, you know, you pick a fight like that, you're just going there and just getting ready for the fight. And sometimes, you know, UFC debut, you almost kind of got nothing to lose, and that's always, you know, makes for a very dangerous opponent when you kind of got nothing to lose.
Yeah. Hey, we've seen guys walk in on those short notice fights and come out victorious and do major things for their career. Look at Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman beat Damian Maia on 11 days' notice, cut 22 pounds, and look where he's at now. Hey.
All right. Let's get to the next fight of the evening in the middleweight division as Francis Carmol will take on Talas Leites. Looking at Francis Carmol, he is 6-2 in the UFC, currently riding a 2-fight losing streak. His last fight was a loss to CB Dalloway at Fight Night Berlin, and of his 22 career victories, 10 are by submission. Looking at Talas Leites, he is 8-3 in the UFC, overall riding a 6-fight winning streak, and he is 3-0 since his return to the UFC last year. His last fight was a victory over Trevor Smith at Fight Night 40, and of his 23 career victories, 13 are by submission. Now, these are two guys right now, Dave, very similar, both grappling-based fighters, but both are moving in opposite directions. Talas Leites right now is projecting up in the division, and Francis Carmol is projecting down in the division right now. And really just a couple fights ago, Carmol was on a very short path to the UFC title. Now Talas Leites maybe is only a couple fights away from getting back to a UFC title shot, something he got many years ago. And looking at this fight, Carmol, I think, wants to keep this standing. I think even though he's probably a little bigger, maybe a little stronger than Leites, I think technically Leites, with his jiu-jitsu background, is the better grappler. And we've seen in his last couple fights, despite the size and his grappling skill, Carmol get dominated by Jacare and then dominated by CB Dalloway in the stand-up department. Now, I would say Leites isn't as good of a takedown artist as either of those two gentlemen, but he's just as equally as skilled in getting submission victories and, you know, tactical positioning and all that. But if Carmol can keep it standing, an area where he has definitely improved in his last couple fights, I see no reason he can't get a victory. But if Leites is able to get this fight to the ground and get on top, I think he can very much win this fight. So for Carmol, you know, you got to do something in this fight because you got to try to snap out of it, because the UFC was already on you for being boring, and you lose 3 fights in a row. I don't care, how many wins you had before, who you're training partners with, the UFC will cut you. So, this is a very big fight for Francis Carmel.
Yeah, this is a statement fight for Francis Carmel. He knows he knows that there's what's the word I'm looking for? There's the pressures of having a good performance. He knows that it's there. He knows that he will get cut if this is his third loss in a row. But this is definitely one of those fights that he can come out, if he can beat Thales Leites in this fight. It proves that, the bright lights, the thought of, career on the line, job on the line, that none of that stuff bothers him. If he can come out with a dominating performance, Carmel looks very good after that. But let's not overlook Thales Leites. Thales Leites is very, kind of like you said, Jim, he can get a submission victory. Might not have the best takedown, but I was looking at it before. What did he have? 13 submission victories out of 23? Yeah, 13 of 23 submission victories. So I think this is a dangerous fight for both guys everywhere.
The co-main event of the evening will be in the welterweight division as former WEC welterweight champion Mike Quicksand Pyle will take on Jordan Meehan. Looking at Mike Pyle, 9-4 in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over TJ Wahlberger at UFC 170, and of his 16 career victories, 26 are by submission. Looking at Jordan Meehan, just 2-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a win over Hernan Pichartudo at Fox 11, and of his 28 career victories, 15 are by knockout. Now, this is a very interesting fight, Dave. Meehan is a guy that is definitely one of the prospects here in this division, a very young guy at 24 years old, and then you got the crafty veteran, I believe, at 36 years old, and Mike Pyle, who's still around, still making exciting fights, and he's kind of like, he kind of reminds me like the Clay Guida of the 170 division, where he's always a difficult matchup for anybody. He may not always win, but he's a guy that's tricky in so many areas. He's a good grappler. He has good submissions. May not be the best stand-up guy, but he's long, lanky. He can catch you off guard. He can get you in power. He's good in the clinch. He's just a very crafty guy and always seems to have a great strategy for whoever he takes on. And I think for Jordan Meehan, this is a guy I really don't think you want to mess with on the ground. You really do not want to get in close to Mike Pyle or really try to mess with him that way. I really don't think at Meehan's at that level where he can go out there and make a point and grapple with a guy like Mike Pyle. And so I think you got to keep your range, got to keep your distance, use your great counters that you already have, and try to be powerful. Because at times Mike Pyle can kind of throw some looping shots, and I think he can catch them and can counter. But you got to watch for kind of what Matt Brown did to you. You got to watch for Mike Pyle kind of get on you and being aggressive, and that is something that Meehan, I don't know if he's corrected yet because he didn't really see that in his last fight. So we'll see if Mike Pyle kind of goes for that route that kind of got him a little bit flustered against Matt Brown. So this is a big learning experience for Jordan Meehan. This is another veteran opponent, another kind of bigger name opponent to see if Meehan's ready kind of for the big time here in the welterweight division. And I'm really excited for this matchup. I really like both guys, and I think we're going to see a really good fight between these two.
Yeah, from what I remember of Jordan Meehan, Jim, he fought for like the MFC. Is that correct? No.
He's fought for the Elite XC and then Strikeforce.
Yeah, he fought for Score Fighting Series. I remember seeing that fight on HDNet, and I always thought of him as a smaller welterweight. But I just looked at it, and him and Pyle, there's only a 1-inch difference in height and a 1-inch difference in reach. So, when you were saying that about me and probably trying to stay at range, I was kind of shaking my head. But then I looked at the numbers, and if I think I want to agree that if he can stay at range, I think that that improves his chances greatly for victory. Like you said, I don't think he wants to go to the ground and mess around with Mike Pyle at all on the ground. But Mike Pyle, kind of like you said, he's exactly like Clay Guida is to the lower divisions. He's a tough opponent. I don't want to call him a gatekeeper, but if you can get past Pyle, not very many people have in the UFC. but if you can get past him, that does great things for your career because that's a very, very solid victory.
Well, let's get to the main event of the evening in the UFC's 155-pound division, as former 155-pound champion Ben "Smooth" Henderson will take on Rafael dos Anjos. Looking at dos Anjos, 10-5 in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Jason High at Fight Night Albuquerque. He has won, I believe, 4 out of his last 5 fights, and 10 of his 21 career victories are by decision. Looking at Ben Henderson, the former champ, 9-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Rustam Khabilov at also Fight Night Albuquerque, and much like his opponent, 10 of his 21 career victories are by decision. Now, the big thing Ben Henderson has going for him in this fight is conditioning. Dos Anjos has never been 25 minutes. Ben Henderson's done it on many, many occasions. So as this fight goes longer, I got to favor the former champion in this fight. Standing up, I would maybe say Dos Anjos has a little more power, Dave, but Henderson's going to be a little taller, a little longer, and definitely a lot more technical coming from that Taekwondo background. Now, wrestling, we know Dos Anjos can go in there. He can grapple. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He has some decent takedowns, some decent submissions. I just find it hard to believe he would be able to take down Ben Henderson. I mean, Khabilov comes from that Sambo background, has a lot of takedowns from a lot of different angles, using the clinch and whatnot, and he didn't have much success against Ben Henderson. So I find it hard to believe that Dos Anjos is going to go in there and find success in the takedown game. And if it turns to a stand-up battle, it becomes a little more of a toss-up. Because Henderson, he's a good stand-up fighter, but I wouldn't call him a great stand-up fighter. And it should be interesting because, you also look at the aspect of Henderson. Yeah, Henderson can take him down, probably. And, yeah, he can probably be on top of him. But let's not forget, Henderson has been submitted before. And sometimes, if you look at his escapes and stuff from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, they're not very technical. They're more powering out of things and, doing it that way, slam and, just kind of willing himself out more so than doing the technical procedure to get out of some of those positions. And that may play into a guy who's very good at getting submissions in Dos Anjos. But once again, I think if it goes past third, I don't think Dos Anjos will have much in the tank to try to counter Ben Henderson. So as this fight goes longer, it definitely favors the man from Washington.
Yeah. Hey, how about this? This is the 8th consecutive event that Ben Henderson has headlined. It's pretty impressive for somebody who's not the champion.
That's like Rich Franklin territory there.
Yeah. He's headlined 3 events not being the champion. That's pretty impressive. Anyway, this is I don't want to say it. This is kind of like a trap fight for Ben Henderson. All these fights are. He's fighting these high-quality guys, and as long as the guy that's on that poster behind you, as long as he remains with the belt around his waist, I don't think Henderson's getting a shot at it. So, he's got to fight these tough guys. If he's victorious, all he's really doing is waiting for Pettis to lose. And, good on him for taking tough fights, but I mean, if you're Ben Henderson, you have to have the thought that even if you win and Alvarez is victorious later, he's going to leapfrog you, which that's got to mess with your mind. So I guess if you're Bendo, you go into the fight, get some bonuses, and just keep taking fights. But I don't think this is a fight that he can look past at all. Dos Anjos has been on the tear, and this is a fight that he's wanted, and he got it. So to me, this is definitely my pick for fight of the night. I think that this fight is going to be good wherever it goes.
All right, then, let's get to picks here, Dave, for UFC Fight Night 49, starting first at 145 pounds. Chaz Skelly against Thomas Ninamaki. I don't know a lot about Skelly, so I'm going to go with the guy I've at least seen once. I'm gonna go with the man. I believe he's from Finland, so give me Ninamaki.
I'll take Stoneface, which I'm sure you know is Ninamaki.
Of course, everyone knows that. All right, moving on to the next fight at 155 pounds. James Vick against Valmir Lazaro. Again, I'm going to go with James Vick. I've seen him fight before. He's going to be the taller guy, the lankier guy. And, despite the long layoff, Dave, I guess you could say he actually has UFC experience. So I'm going to go with James Vick.
The Texecutioner, James Vick. That's who I'm going to go with.
That's a great name. That's a great nickname. All right, let's go catch weight. Max Holloway against Clay Collard. Collard on short notice, making his UFC debut against pretty solid competitor Max Holloway. Not sure if that's the greatest of matchup form, so I'll go with I believe he's the blessed one, Max Holloway.
Yep, and I mean, think about it. Max Holloway has been dominant at 145, and now you're going to allow him to not cut as much weight during fight week. I mean, this guy's going to be feeling good. He's going to be fat. Going to be feeling great. I think it makes for either a quick night or a long night for Clay, but I'll take Max Holloway as well.
At middleweight, Francis Carmol against Talas Leites. I think this is a really close fight. Like I said, you got a guy who stocks up right now and a guy who stocks down. Who's going to go in there. You also got Carmol. Maybe his back's against the wall a little bit, but I'm going to go with Francis Carmol to get off this streak here. I think he's going to be able to stop the takedown and use some of that improving stand-up he's shown in his last couple of fights, and I think he's going to get back on the winning track in this one.
Yeah, anytime that I can say Francis Carmol, that's what I'm going to do. So I'll take Francis Carmol.
All right, co-main event, welterweight division, Mike Pyle against Jordan Meehan. I think this is going to be a really fun fight, Dave, but I think Meehan has a little more power. At times we've seen Mike Pyle get caught. I think he can win this fight, if he could turn into a brawl or a grappling match, do some crazy things out there, but I think Meehan's going to win this one. I'm going to go with Jordan Meehan.
I'm going to go with Quicksand, just so I can get ahead of you, because I think you're going to miss one. So
probably. All right, let's get to the main event of the evening. Rafael Dos Anjos against Ben Henderson. It's Ben Henderson. I mean, the guy wins. I mean, it's 9-1 in the UFC. Ridiculous. I mean, Dos Anjos has a chance, but yeah, I mean, it's Ben Henderson. I don't think, since we've been doing picks on the show, Dave, I don't think I've ever picked against Ben Henderson. So I'm not starting now. So go Ben Henderson.
Okay, hold on a second.
Oh no, I know what he's queuing up. If people don't know already, he's gonna queue up Ben Henderson's signature walkout song. Do you even know the group on that?
Yeah, R. Swift.
R. Swift, Taylor Swift's cousin. With Our God is an Awesome God. That first fact I'm not sure about, though.
Hold on, I'm waiting for the Geico pig.
Oh, no. Oh. Did you save 15% of your car insurance while we were waiting? You gotta turn it up louder.
God, hold on. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do the pick any justice at all. Hold on.
Oh no. Well, I might as well get our shout-outs out of the way. Definitely got to thank our friends, VigilanteMMA.com, our friends at MMAinsider.net. Follow them at MMAinsider.net on Twitter, MMAforlife.ca. Of course, their Twitter's at _MMAforlife. Got them. Friends at Bluegrass MMA, BluegrassMMA.com, and that's at Bluegrass MMA on Twitter. We just got hooked up with our friends at MMA-Freak.com. They got a brand new website, just completely redesigned. It looks great. You'll see the Beyond the Cage logo right up there in front. So definitely visit MMA-Freak.com. You can follow them on Twitter at MMA Freakout. Of course, our partners at Top Rated MMA. You can check out their gear and buy some of it at TopRatedMMA.com. Remember, all their half their proceeds go to the Hire Heroes Foundation to help out former U.S. military veterans. We also have our friends at MMASignaturesUSA.com. AJ Hiller over there, best deals on the internet for MMA signed by Rabila, so go check out him, MMA Signatures. And, of course, our presenting sponsor, Fight Chicks MMA. They got a lot of new gear coming out. If you didn't see Dave's video talking with owner and founder Elizabeth Nusser, they got a lot of cool gear coming, and it's coming up quickly because they're going to be big time all over Invicta 8 coming up on September 6th. So, all right, Dave, let's get to your pick here for the main event, Henderson or Dos Anjos.
Isn't that awesome? I don't know if you guys can see it.
Yeah, we got it. There he is.
So there you go.
So that was your pick, Ben Henderson, if no one got that.
Yeah. Like, why is he?
All right. He's Dave Sadler, the Juice at Vigilante Juice on Twitter. I'm Jim Gramm at Jim Gramm on Twitter. Thanks again for watching, and if you're listening to the audio version here of Beyond the Cage, we appreciate it. And again, like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast, and we're on YouTube, which you're watching the show. But if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out all our videos at youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. All right, for Dave Sadler, I am Jim Gramm. Thanks again for watching Beyond the Cage, presented by Fight Chicks.